Thanks for being here. I'm super pleased to introduce Gordon Hall, sculptor, writer, performance maker, professor, director of experimental lectures, currently based in New York and here with us today. Please join me in welcoming Gordon Hall.
Hi. I understand some of you have your thesis show tomorrow. Is that true? Well, thank you for being here. Hopefully this can be a nice break. Is anyone familiar with this door? So this is the door in Duchamp's apartment, and it closes the kitchen and the bathroom, but only ever one at a time. I want to start with just a very short excerpt of a performance of mine called And Per Se And. Note: if you are nervous speaking for a crowd, don't hold a piece of paper up where they can see it, because that's how your trembling becomes visible. Vibrating the piece of paper, tiny shakes. The same goes for a glass of water in your hand. Ripples. So I'm going to be talking about my work today for you in like 3 sections. The first part gives sort of a broad overview of my work, and I'm going to be showing quite a lot of images while I speak, and I'm not going to be talking directly about all of them, so if something flies by and you want to ask about it, I would love that. And then after I do that, I'm going to talk about 2 specific shows, one from 2021 and the other one just this past fall. So I spend my time thinking about our body's relationships with objects. And I make my sculptures as a way to examine these relationships, these embodied relationships with things, particularly things that we use. And I'm trying to unfurl what I think of as the social components of these relationships, the ways that they're emotional or sexual or political, trying to think through our lives as bodies in relation to things. So sculpture making is at the center of what I do, but I also explore these questions through performance and in critical writing, and also in event organizing, and I'm particularly interested in creative modes of public speaking. And I have a curatorial sort of side project called the Center for Experimental Lectures. And I'm not going to talk about it a ton today, but I'm happy to talk about it more with anyone who wants to. So I do all these different things, and I've never been very concerned with the disciplinary distinctions between art making, writing, research, performance, public speaking, event organizing. I think of them all as forms of making, and I think of them all as things that we do with our bodies, just as reading or speaking words are also material practices. Perhaps it's correct to say that I'm just simply a sculptor, because no matter what kind of work I'm doing, I'm understanding myself as a body in physical and spatial relations with bodies and things, other people's bodies and things, whether I'm in analog or virtual or digital space. I came to sculpture originally not really through fine art, but through dance. And I think that what I learned as a dancer has profoundly shaped the way I think about my body and my approach to object making. So my sculptures, which is primarily what I'm going to be talking about today, emerge from the world of furniture, and they exist at the scale of furniture, so they're like largely under waist height. And I periodically put them to use in performances both of choreographed movement and also improvised movement, by my own body and by the bodies of other performers who participate in my work. I make objects that I design, as well as objects that are exact replicas of pieces of found furniture, pursuing a kind of intimacy that I can have with a thing through getting to know it well enough to remake it. Sculpturally, I'm particularly interested in furniture because of the ways that furniture and furniture-like objects always request or conjure bodies, even when none are present. Like a chair asks for a butt, and a handle asks for a hand, and a step asks for a foot. So my objects make these kinds of requests while also troubling our efforts to definitively read them. So they're asking for something, but we don't always know what it is exactly. I'm trying to make things that are a this, and a this, and a this, if that makes sense, that sort of refuse to arrive at any single identity. And in this way, I hope them to be both recognizable, but also unrecognizable or strange. And I think about this perhaps in relation to the way my own body pushes up against some maybe normative categories of gendered personhood. My objects are sometimes my proxies and sometimes my companions, and either way, I make them as a method for imagining bodies differently. So I'm excited about objects' capacities to be of use, especially when those uses are unconventional, unexpected, or merely imagined. Insofar as my objects are often used in performance, it's possible that they could be described as props, though this term has always felt like not quite the right term, because what I'm really seeking is to respond to the requests that my objects make with my body, sort of existing among them as a thing, myself, thing among things, and acting in response to their needs. So I make them first, and then I listen to what they ask for, what should happen on, or with, or among them. So I truly don't know what they're for while I'm making them. It's possible that this is, in some sense, a reversal of the conventional relationship between performers and props, as in some sense my objects are the primary actors, and I and my fellow performers are supporting them, or even becoming their props, in a way. Like if the script of a play requires a character to sit, a chair has to be gotten for that person to sit in. In my work, that chair would come first, and then the action would be determined in relationship to the chair. So I make things, and then I ask them what they want from me and what they want from us. So I'm equally invested in what I could describe as particularity and specificity. There's obviously a lot of very precise fabrication and decision making that goes into these. But I'm also very invested in what I would describe as abstraction, opacity, strategies of refusal, and I view these two seemingly opposed approaches as congruent in the world of my work, making what I have sometimes described as extremely precise objects of ambiguous use. So I'm interested in very extreme clarity in certain situations, but also using it as a way to refuse particular kinds of readings. For me, abstraction has been a method for refusing demands of legibility, while also expressing my orientation toward an as yet non-existent but desperately needed future, trying to speak now in what I think of as maybe a tomorrow language. So, speaking even if we can't yet understand what we're saying, for example. In this way, my work is always trying to bring me to a potential but not yet knowable place, like a kind of gesture of pointing towards where such a horizon might exist. So I don't necessarily know what's there, but the works are trying to point. Further, I reject a sort of an orthodoxy I've sometimes encountered that would assert that abstraction and representation exist in distinct spheres. I want both, and I'm particularly excited about making groups of sculptures that contain a spectrum of more and less identifiable forms. Like, how is an identifiable object changed when it is next to an unnameable abstract form, for example? And how do we reread maybe an unidentifiable formal abstraction when it is adjacent to something as familiar as like a chair, for example? So I think of these kinds of object relations across degrees of legibility as a way of like troubling our practices of reading, asking us to meet the things where they are and in how they want to be looked at together in relationship to one another. My work definitely does emerge from my lived experience as like a gender different person within a community of people who I think of as also challenging pre-existing categories for, you know, the way we organize types of human beings. But I've also been very cautious about how my identity becomes visible in my work, and especially in its public framing. I'm motivated both by an understanding of identity as complex, layered, and always shifting, but perhaps even more than that, I'm very skeptical about a kind of representation and inclusion model for thinking about how institutions relate to artists of really like any kind of difference, whether that's gender difference or racial difference or differences in ability, you name it. So this is something I'm excited to talk about if anyone wants to talk about it more. I think museums obviously have a long way to go to pursue like real diversity and equity, and they have not entirely yet figured out how to do that in a way that doesn't involve like tokenizing artists of non-normative identity groups. So I've really structured my work and my career in a way that tries to make it so that I can't be like used as an example of my type. Perhaps some of you have read this essay called Why I Don't Talk About the Body, a polemic. And I've tried to put some of this stuff into words in this place. It's the only polemic I've written, don't worry. And then perhaps like moreover, you know, beyond all of this, I think about my work, like I make it with the intent for it to be a resource for anyone who, for whatever reason, is looking to complicate the processes by which we read bodies in relationship to identity, and any other form of like bodily difference. So in this way, my work's both rooted in my lived experience, but really made as a resource for others and thinking about other people as people who are similar from me and people who have very different experiences. My work is based in the belief that objects can teach us how to see other objects and also our own and one another's bodies. I make things that help me retrain my own perception towards slower, more nuanced practices of reading that can accommodate high levels of unknowing. I think that art making, at its core, is a rigorous and committed practice of learning to know the world differently. And this involves cultivating one's own ability to unknow and to re-know by rejecting normative modes of seeing and doing. And I really do think that artists utilize a special combination of thinking and doing, research and making. Like we ask questions, but then we have to manifest those questions as things in the shared world, the shared perceptual world. So just practically speaking, I make things out of a variety of materials. So I make things out of cast concrete and I mix pigment into the concrete, so a lot of the colors you're seeing are in the concrete itself, not layered on top. Actually, to make my own grays. That one has a wood handle.
And are these cast forms or?
Yeah, they're all made slightly differently, but they're all like cast using different materials and different steps in the process, but yeah, they're all cast. Like this one's actually separate pores connected internally, like an inlay. I make wood sculptures, usually like just laminated together and then sanded and waxed. And then I also carve things. This is quite a small object. It's just like a little balsa wood block. And then I color wood in with colored pencil. For scale, those are my height, and they're orange colored pencil, blue colored pencil. And then more recently, I've been putting things into wood. So these are like thousands of little nail heads. We'll talk about this one a little more. And then these are thumbtacks that are painted. I make things out of fabric, which I dye myself, and that are all folded in various ways. I make my own tile, which I use in mosaic. And then I make things out of carved brick. So these all start out as blocks that are then carved into. Inspired by my collection of beach bricks, like, you know, when they get round. And then I've been making colored pencil on like semi-transparent paper, sort of drawings that often are on the floor, usually in the shape of doors. And then I recently made a pair of pants. So those are to scale, my pants. And it's all the seams, like it wouldn't come together. And then recently I've also been working colored pencil on paper, making these sort of like sash pieces. And then I have one cast brass sculpture, which is a brass recreation of this shim that was made for this other work that was wood, but then hung around for several years and got remade in brass. So I make the objects in groups for particular exhibitions or projects, and I think of them as both like individual discrete objects, but also really as innate groups, like even sort of kin with one another. So after they get presented together initially, they do often get separated and shown independently, they get sold individually, etc. But I really do think of them like a family. They're always sort of connected to their original group, similar to like songs on an album or essays in a book. So my body and the bodies of my performers enter into these groupings as equal members, like a difference in degree, but not in type entirely. And one of my investments as an artist and as a person is to pose this like ongoing question about the pleasures and risks of allowing oneself to feel like or become an object, and what it means to be objectified, both in destructive and, I think, potentially reparative ways. I have found that being a thing among the family of my things has helped me transform some of my own like traumatic experiences of like non-consensual objectification, and that I've also been able to perhaps extend this experience to some of the performers who have worked with me in the process of being in my work. These ideas about traumatic and reparative objectification have appeared in my writing in various ways, including trying to think through the role of nightlife, and particularly queer nightlife, as a context in which we can appear in our full objectness for one another in a way that sort of embraces rather than disavows our bodiness. Generally speaking, I start from the assertion that there is no me that's not my body, period. And there's a vulnerability that opens up from this, but that also contains in it like a vast assortment of possible pleasures, dangers, physical self-transformations. So I don't think I have like a soul or like a mind or like anything else other than this. So some of the exhibitions include performance and others don't. And this balance feels important to me because of the ways that the possibility of performance shapes how we view so-called like static objects. So I'm interested in how the way we look at something, how the way we look at an object gets shifted when we know that something can or might or did happen with it. So the possibility of performance, even when it doesn't take place, keeps open this question of use, and it, inviting a viewer, I hope, to see a sculpture, a still object, and ask themselves, like, what is this for? Or how would I use this? The posing of those questions is in many ways like equally important to me as the performances themselves. And I hope it kind of remains active even in the exhibitions that are just sculpture, because I find, or I hope I find, that the mere knowledge that I work with moving bodies influences how people read the sculptures, which, whether there's performance or not, are for me always complete, even when their uses don't get demonstrated publicly.
Can I ask how you make decisions on who you use in your performances, and like the particular bodies that you're interested in?
Yeah, sure. How do I find them? Sometimes it's people I know, sometimes it's people I don't. I actually find sourcing performers to be really, really hard, especially as I've been like working in places I don't live and don't know people. Like the video that was playing when folks came in, all of those young women are all dance students who live in Istanbul, because like that's where the show was. But I do try to get like, ideally, kind of just like a range of different kinds of people. I'm not trying to get them to like look like me or even act like me. I sort of try to get them to do the things the way they do them. And I have one project that I'm not going to talk about in a lot of detail today, where I worked with all people like in their 70s and 80s. So that was a very specific thing I wanted for that. So the performances happen in the space of the exhibition, just once or twice during a long show, or interspersed throughout the day at unannounced times. I've started working kind of exclusively in that way, making like subtle, sort of short, unscheduled performances that take place randomly for whoever happens to be there at that time. I was making more things where it was like everybody showed up and sat down, but as the audience grew bigger, which I'm grateful for, but it kind of produced something that felt to me like a spectacle or like a kind of a crowd attracting situation. And performance often creates that in contemporary art context, and it felt to me really like not a good match for like the ethics or the politics of what I'm trying to do. So I sort of landed on these like small scale, quiet, perhaps intimate moments between objects and performers and audiences that happen when they aren't announced, because it's usually only one or two people who happen to see something. I've also performed, or rather explored some more like ephemeral modes of performance, like one in which somebody had to drive up outside the museum and play music really loudly in their car that would like come in, or this one, this ice cube shaped like a soda can had to be like put out on the sidewalk today. So I guess thinking of like the melting of ice as a kind of performance. I don't ever show the documentation of the performances in the show itself, and I'm more interested in sort of like the rumors that something might happen or did happen than I am in like seeing it reproduced like on a video monitor in the show and stuff like that. I'm particularly interested in moments of touch between objects and bodies, like particularly hands and feet, and I have a series of works that are specifically focused on tactility and handheldness as ways of knowing the world. This interest in the handheld relates to an investment in the handmade qualities of my work, which I think of as like evidence of the time we spent together as I made them, sort of pressed up against my body. That's a very small thing. So when I'm working on a show, I'm trying to think about what kind of space it will be to be in, like when you come. And I think about exhibitions as a place to spend time. And I ask myself, you know, what kind of time do I want to offer people who come? And some of the ways I've answered this question is to try to make a place that has sort of like slices of a variety of other places. So maybe like a public pool, or the waiting room of like the auto mechanic, or a nightclub, or a church, or like the side of a hill with a nice view. I think I'm trying to combine elements of all of these, sort of like languid voyeurism of the pool, the suspended, blurred time of the waiting room, the sort of embodied, like less linguistic, maybe like homosocial space of the nightclub, or the extreme object-oriented specificity of a religious site, and this kind of expansive introspection of looking at a view from far away. The activities that take place in the spaces I'm making are in some sense useless or useful only for purposes that are themselves sort of hard to account for in conventional ways. So I think I'm trying to make this like particular type of useful uselessness that I can offer to people who come to spend time in the space. So as I mentioned, writing has been an important part of my working as an artist, both in the form of texts that are incorporated in the work itself, like performance scripts, or there was a project that had a letter that was centrally part of it, but also in critical writing about other artists' work. The first 7 years of my writing were collected in this book called Over Beliefs, in conjunction with the show that I had at the Portland Institute for Contemporary Art, which was the images you saw like in that big warehouse space. This came out with that. Most recently, I was asked by DIA to write about, they were doing a symposium about German minimalism, so they asked me to choose a work from a variety that were on view at the time, and I got really excited because I got to choose a work that I really love by the sculptor and painter Amy Noble called 250,000 Drawings. So the essay called On Closed Boxes sort of used Noble's sculpture of these 5 closed and locked cabinets that are ostensibly filled with 250,000 drawings to analyze like the figure of the closed box through a variety of different lenses, thinking of it as like a closed box as a request for belief, asking us to believe something about what's inside it. The sort of like refusal of the closed box as a resource for thinking about subculture or like political refusal of different kinds, and also thinking about the closed box as kind of a figure for the, you know, eternally offered, if unrealized, possibility of change. That to me feels very necessary for like living in the world personally. So this kind of critical writing has been like an important context for my energy, my creative energy, and it's really helped me sort out some of the ideas and commitments of my work, while also sort of doing this through spending time thinking about other artists and of art that I really love and feel excited about. And it's also enabled me to like contribute to setting the terms of engagement with which other people talk about my work, and has sort of helped it find its audience, and also to contribute to already ongoing conversations around like sculpture, gender, abstraction, certain art historical moments, and just like the power of objects to teach us how to be in the world. I think at the heart of the making and the writing is like a deeply felt disappointment with the present, but wanting to express that through imagining another system of feeling and seeing by sort of like making it come into being now, even if in just like a very limited way in the space of my work. So what I want to do now is show you some works from a solo show that I presented in 2021, and then I'm gonna let some of them kind of like turn into paths that will lead us a few other places. How are we doing? Are we tired of the sound of my voice yet? I am. Okay. So this was the show I made during COVID, and thankfully I could get to my studio during COVID, and then like all my classes and shows got canceled, so I had a lot of time, which was really new, or hadn't happened in a while. It felt very good. I had a lot of fun with this because the gallery had 3 different rooms, separate but interconnected rooms, so I was kind of able to like think about one show as like 3 smaller shows, and each room had its own thing happening. I had never gotten to do that before. So the title of the show was End of Day, and that term is primarily used as a like description of, you know, in the world of stock trading, like, you know, EOD. And believe it or not, I titled this show like before March 2020, so I couldn't have known what was coming, but I was yearning for like the time of day when you return home or return somewhere, and kind of imagining a dream life less consumed by constant work and circulation and public display. I guess weird because it is a public display, but. And I was thinking about the like intimate relationships we have with some of our most familiar inanimate companions, like the furniture we live with and on and around. So I'm going to go through the works one at a time very quickly and let them take us places. So this is the work that greets you when you walk in. It's called U-Stool. It's cast pigmented concrete. It's an uppercase Helvetica U. And then it's cast at the scale of like a usable stool. It rocks back and forth slightly if you sit on it. And I put it right in the front of the show, so it's the first thing you see when you come in, like from the hall. Like that, right between the door handles. And I thought of it as kind of like interpolation, or, you know, speaking to the viewer like, I think, I try to spend as much time as I can, like thinking about the work's relationships to each other in the space. So I often ask to just be allowed to sit in there for a day or two when it's empty before I install, because I really slowly understand where everything's supposed to go. This is harder when the show is further away, but I think really try to ask for that, make time for it. Because I'm thinking a lot about, when someone comes in, like, they're not seeing everything at once, it's unfolding, in time. So they're seeing certain things first, second, third, and then they see other things when they turn around to leave. So really trying to understand, not that everybody moves the exact same way through the space, but like, what is the unfolding, the temporal unfolding of these objects, including like their different sides. So this U sculpture is definitely part of this interest in like the sort of material aspects of language and even of like letter forms. As in this work called Ampersand, which the little excerpt that I read at the beginning was part of, which I thought of very much as like a kind of an object alphabet that I was arranging and rearranging. Or in this work called Holding the Room as an Aside, I had a couple of years where I was obsessed with parentheses, so I made these like huge parentheses that were like the size for me to be the letter. And then really recently, this is a solo show from just this fall, the U, same U, but it got very small to like hold up this other sculpture, so it became like a platform. It's like 2 inches. So this interest in the materiality of language is also part of what motivates me on this curatorial project, the Center for Experimental Lectures. And what that is like commissioning works from other artists or writers or academics that invites them to like take the situation of the public lecture as the raw material for making new work. Part of this is a kind of thinking about the gathering of bodies to hear a speaker as being about so much more than the information that's being presented. So this has gone on for 12 years now, sometimes many times a year, sometimes not at all. It's not like a nonprofit, it doesn't have a space, it's just an arts project. I have a collaborator now named Zoe Lubitz who does it with me. Okay, so this is called Companion Stool. It's friends with the U, it's sort of like a companion to it. I tend towards that, like making works as a pair, or even as they're individuals, they still sort of go together. It's kind of like a footstool, bookrest, or something like a torso could be laid over. It's definitely in conversation with this object called the slant step, which is a whole thing we could talk about, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's this kind of like mythical object that all these artists have gone into, that like Bruce Nauman bought in the late 60s at a thrift store. And I've written about it as a kind of way of thinking about objects' capacities to, like objects with ambiguous functionality shaping our vision, because the whole thing about this is nobody knows what it's for. This is that essay. This is also a very recent work from the solo show this fall, which is certainly in conversation with us. This is called Judy's Footstool. Judy's my mom, and this is a recreation of this little footstool that she got made by someone on Etsy for her feet under her desk, and I remade it and made this like rigid sash that only will drape over it in one way. So we were talking a little bit about closed boxes. The show had 2 closed boxes. One of them's a little more closed than the other. And the scale on the one with all the holes in it, it's called negative space box. It's like the the size of a shoebox if you were to buy like a large pair of boots. And this other one it's bigger. I wish I had an image of this in here, I don't. You know, in parks in the city, there's often these concrete boxes that like hide electrical equipment. Okay. So this is another sort of pair, leaning back 1 and leaning back 2. They're the same height on the wall. And this is an example of what I was trying to talk about earlier about like putting more and less recognizable objects in relationship to each other. So this one, it's cast concrete with pigment in it. It's in 2 pieces. It's leaning. There's no hidden hardware. I don't use things to like magically hold stuff up. It's always a bit hard to tell, but the shadow underneath it is bright orange. So the back of the object that's leaning is like really fluorescent orange. You can't get in a position to see it unless you like lay on the floor and stick your head in there, but you can see the orange shadow on the wall. I've worked with this kind of colored shadow in a variety of ways over the years. And there's kind of poetics to this reversal that's always felt important, like an object that faces away from you but reveals itself through its reflection, kind of inviting and preventing you from seeing it directly, or like an object that saves its most exciting dynamic side for nobody, but like gives you a hint about it. I love introverts, as you can probably tell. So then, leaning back 2 is a elongated like chair back of a shaker-style chair. And then the front is, just unfinished. And then the back is painted. I was trying to make it feel like the shadow on the wall had kind of like come out onto it, like this kind of deep gray color. So this like backwards facing has been with me. The more recent of the 2 solo shows, which is called Turn Back, explored this in a different way and revolved around this like photo of this concrete garden lion, which appears facing away from you here in this photo, which appeared in the show like 4x6, rubbed onto the wall as a transfer. And then also there's the original lion. I acquired her and then I made a replica of her who faces the back of the gallery. And then this title, similar to the you, who kind of talks to you when you enter end of day, the show is called Turn Back, and that's the first thing you see, almost like telling people to turn around and leave. So here's one of these folded pieces. So it's actually 4 long strips. It's not sewn together, like if you pulled it, it would just come apart. All hand-dyed, so you can see it's kind of like models. I'm trying to make things that, from far away look like one thing, and when you get closer, can like give you an extra layer of interest or intentionality. Okay, so now we're in the second room, and right away there's like this balsa block, colored pencil. It's perforated with a Dremel. I started making these like really small scale floor-based works maybe a decade ago, and it felt, at the time, it felt really important to me to start like making something so diminutive and small and kind of unmonumental. Initially, I started making them, I think, in response to being invited to be in group shows, and had a kind of visceral rejection of this kind of like competition for attention that takes place in a group show, like all the things in line, trying to get you to like look at the most interesting one, and I just felt like I can't participate in this. So I started thinking, what if I make things that are, not, that are engaging, but they're quite small and they go underneath other people's work that's really more attention grabbing. So all of these things are quite small. And then this is one of the small pieces with Franz Erhard Falter piece. So this is very recent, that I got to kind of put it quite under one of my artist heroes. It's sort of self-deprecating and silly, but I do think it's been important to me to figure out how to make objects that can feel important without being physically large. Not wanting to participate in the kind of attention economy that equates scale or size with power, and especially as you're mostly sculptors, there's kind of this sense, especially as you go along, your projects are supposed to get more and more big and towering over you, and I think there's a part of me that really cringes at that. Here's another one of these, little hovering. Those are those little feet that hold up potted plants. I blame COVID for this one. It's cast concrete and colored pencil. Polka dots, there's humor in this to me. I don't know how much it registers with other people, but something about drawing these polka dots on top of these bulged legs, circles. And then I actually ended up, I had the wood original that I made these legs from, which then appeared in the more recent of these solo shows. So it got covered in graphite and then appeared like this with a tiny little, this is actually a 17th century painting that was an original that was made for satin upholstery fabric. So it's a 1-inch painting in the show. I try to, not always, but often, there's one work that kind of has the title of the show as its title, which is kind of a way of indicating that it is sort of the core work or the hint work or something that's the center in some way. So for this show, it was this clothes ballet. Are people familiar with this kind of furniture object? You don't see them that often anymore. They're extremely weird. They're meant to hold your entire outfit while you sleep. So there's the coat hanger, and then this comes off actually on the top, and then the little metal things go in and out, and you put your watch in the little shelf, and your shoes on the bars on the bottom, and they're for men, whatever that means. It's this piece of furniture that's for men's clothes. So mine is an exact replica of one that I have, but I wanted it to feel like a wood floor with nails in it, that had been cleaned a million times and worn down. This was probably the most time-consuming thing I've ever made, and I don't know if I'll ever do it again. But I have been, repeatedly drawn to these kinds of really time-consuming processes, I think, as a way of connecting with my work, or of trying to make sure, I don't know, trying to tell my audience I care as much about these things as I maybe hope they will care a fraction of that, or something like this, a kind of ethical agreement. So recently, this is one of those shoe trying on stools that anyone who grew up in the US in the 80s or first part of the 90s probably remembers trying on shoes at one of these. And so I remade it to scale in wood, and then covered it in a ballpoint pen. I also don't know if I'll do this again. This is the work Sash that I was talking about. So this is just colored pencil and paper. And it's a portrait of a bathroom sash that I have. then these are these pants. The colored pencil and graphite are on both sides, so in some places you're seeing like the color on the top, and then in other times you're seeing it pressed against the floor. I'm often making things that are like hovering against the floor, or like coming off the wall in a way where I'm trying to make people think about that behind area, but in this, I guess I was also trying to get us to think about that spot even when it's completely smushed. This is slightly out of order, but Printed Matter made a silk-screened edition of that sash piece, so there's like, I think 150 of these, and they put them in this cute little tube, and they ship with the peg with little instructions. So it actually looks exactly like the original. And then recently there's been some more like this. This is from Turn Back. This is a belt to scale, paper belt. That's a whole holes and negative space, like it's cut out. Okay, moving right along, we're nearing the end. 5-part bench. I'm guessing there's some sculpture nerds in here, so I just had a lot of fun figuring out how to make a mold of draped fabric, which I can tell you, it involved a lot of aquaresin. So I wanted, it was kind of this optical illusion of this draped fabric, like holding up this kind of Art Deco column, and then in the top is sort of like my perverted take on like a hostile architecture type bench that like prevents a person from lying down with these like ridges, but I guess I was also thinking of them as kind of like a perverted thing you might sit on, or I don't know. So we're in this last small room, which was the pants, the negative space box, and then this piece called Graphite Covered Leg, which is just a cast concrete table leg with this ball and claw foot on the end, covered in graphite, leaning. So as you've probably noticed, this ball and claw furniture foot has resurfaced several times over the years. And I love it for a bunch of reasons that I've been very slow to figure out. I guess I think of it in one way as this kind of like moment of holding on to the physical world, like caring for it, grasping onto it, kind of in an anxious way, like how we hold our phones, like having a thing in your hand. And so it's sort of like a symbolic encapsulation of this moment of touch between physical, our bodies and the world. And then there's just this like fantastic, I think, like kind of trans weirdness of like the furniture that's like already, that's like becoming an animal foot on the bottom, and the foot itself is already like a mix of like a bird and a lion together, and then being put on the legs of tables and chairs. I'll really quickly say that there's a bit of an autobiographical piece to this, which is I grew up in a house that had a lot of this kind of furniture and was very, very shy as a kid and hid under the table a lot, so I was often like down there, like with the claw next to me. And as an adult, I learned just some like interesting social history about it, which sort of explains why I was there, which is like my, Jewish, Polish grandparents, when they like, came over from the shtetl, their children were very concerned with like assimilating to like non-Jewish white American culture, and so they all hired interior decorators to decorate their houses with all of this like Queen Anne and like Rococo style furniture, blue and white chintz, and all of this stuff to fully like kind of Eastern European Jewify the house. And so the house that my dad grew up in had a lot of this kind of furniture, and then he just inherited it all, and it was all just like mismatched in our house. And so that's why as a kid I was down there with like the ball and claw next to my face. How are we doing? I made a video for this this show. It was very new and odd, and I kind of hid it in a back hallway because I wasn't like sure if it was a work or not, but I've come to really love it. So it's a life-size projection of one of the Thorne miniature rooms. Has anybody seen the miniature rooms at the University of Chicago? So they're teeny tiny illuminated like dioramas of period rooms. And they were all commissioned by this like quirky, wealthy lady named Narcissa Niblack Thorne. And then there was only one that was made that was like contemporary to its production. So this is in the 1940s. And it's called California Hallway, circa 1940. She hated this kind of design. She called it packing box furniture, but nonetheless, she was very committed to like trying to, you know, make a variety of different settings. Anyway, so, oh yes, there they are for scale. And there's the room. So, and she actually commissioned, that's like a real tiny Leger painting. Seems like got these people to make tiny artworks. Okay, so what it was it's a tiny room projected at life size. So it's projected at scale. And so you look at it and think it's a small image of a big thing, and then you realize when you read the description that it's actually a life-size image of a small thing. So I was interested in this kind of like inversion or playing with scale that was happening here. But then I also almost, I guess, accidentally discovered that when you use a video projector to project a photograph, it feels like it's gonna move. So always, it felt like somebody was about to just like walk in from the side here. And that felt really interesting to me because that sort of anticipation or like potentiality or the feeling like something's about to happen is so aligned with the kind of sculptural goals I was talking about around performance. So I became very excited about that, and then I worked on a different video piece that sort of stemmed from this in a, I guess, a slightly indirect way, which is that I got interested in this piece of light that comes in my studio window. That's my dog. My studio is in upstate New York. There it is. It only comes in March and November, exactly like this. And I wanted to see if I could like remake it, like the way I remake furniture. So I made this video, and the video projector is actually part of it. I have this like funny little projector stand, and it's terrible as a video because it is playing. So it moves very, very, very slowly, and I did a lot of tests. Like I kept bringing people into my studio and asking them, like, is it moving? And then they would say no. But then we'd chat for a second, and it would have moved like 5 inches. And then it also was animated, so I think I worked with an animator on this, so it does change. So I'm actually working on another version of this now because I'm understanding slowly better and better like what it has to do. Yeah, there we go. So I was thinking, like, how can you make a piece that, a moving piece that kind of sets the tone for the, or like sets the pace of how you look at the rest of the sculpture in this show. And I thought that making something that like seems still, but then you would come back and find that it moved, or like maybe seems still and then suddenly changes like that, is a way of like asking for a certain kind of pace of attention for the static objects, which they themselves are like moving so slowly you can't see it if you think about it. So this piece, this show, Turn Back, and then the piece I'm about to show you, like just happened this fall. I really haven't talked about them in any talks yet, so it's fun for me. I'm still trying to figure out how I want to talk about them. I'll just really quickly say, this show produced a book where I was trying to see if I could ask writers to respond to the works the same way I have the dancers, or the way I make the movement in relationship to the work. So asking writers, who were mostly other artists and curators and other people, like people, I mean it was COVID, so I was like really missing everyone, it was sort of like part of my artistic community. I asked folks not to write about the works, but to use the works as a way of thinking through their own stuff. Like, asking what the work wanted from them in terms of their thinking. So they made a quite, I think, beautiful book that like paired the images with texts of different kinds, some of which were quite like scholarly and others were like totally poetic. So that exists, it's a PDF. All my books are PDFs for free. Okay, so Istanbul. This is a beautiful big group show that's all about vulnerability, called Also Your Wound Prosa, that was curated by a Turkish curator named Pelin Moran, and it took place in a building that used to be a Greek elementary school, but it was now like a cultural center, so the exhibition took up the entire school, so most of the works were like in classrooms. The space was very not like white cubish, so it was actually pink and like peeling, and there was desks in some of the rooms. It was really, really interesting. So I went there, you know, I had to be like, I can't possibly make a site-specific work for a place I've never seen, so like you gotta bring me there once to plan it and then bring me back to perform. So we managed to make that happen. So I went and I picked this room, which is like the auditorium. So it's this empty room, it has this mosaic floor, it has these windows with these arched tops, and then on the other side it has this stage with this like painted outline. And so I sat in there for a really long time and felt sort of like daunted about making work for a room that was like so not white cubish, even though I was sick of making work for like rooms that looked the same over and over again. But it was also felt really like I couldn't be making work that was in combination with like other forms that weren't there. Like it had to be, I don't know, what can I give to this space that's not in competition with what's already there? So what I ended up doing was taking the outline of the window and also the outline of the stage and making them into these horizontal cast concrete low benches that were kind of like a curb height. So you can see here, like there's the windows like cut up in this way, like each piece is different. So it's 3 windows, and then it's this stage, which mostly for logistical reasons had to be like cut up into sections, but that was fine, they like clicked together. So that's what it looked like. And one of the things that also felt important to me was that the place from which you can view this work, like the only place that you can view it without being in it is from the stage itself. So I'm like reversing the attention of direction in the room, so you could stand up on the stage and look down into it, like that's where this image is being taken from. The public would come in and they could sit right on it, which is also a bit new for me, trying different things. And then there was also performances that happened all day long. How do I want to do this? Okay, first I'll just say, I think we might have lost our sound. So once every 45 minutes, you heard like a 30-second audio clip, which sounds like this. Yeah, wait. Okay, hang on. Yeah, maybe it just... There we go. Okay, let's try that again. So I felt like I had to have kind of like a trace of the way that this room used to be used. I'm like trying to put our like sonic attention down on the floor to the place where like the wood chairs that are no longer in there were moving around. So I actually frantically made that like in my hotel room using like 2 chairs and then but it worked out okay. I thought I could just record it in the space, but there was so much traffic noise and other things in it, it was impossible, so I had to make it professionally. So then, right, the audience comes in and they can sit on the piece. And then there's a variety of like choreographed pieces, sort of 3 different bits of choreography. These are extremely specific, and it was great working with these dance students because they could really learn it. So it's all folded over this like really detailed things like hands and feet movements. So those things were happening, and then there was other performers that like maybe didn't seem like part of the performance. Like there's these girls who come in and play what they call tile stacking games, which are like Candy Crush and Tetris. And I had them get some like nice manicure, so it was like clicky. So they were like texting, well, you know, playing games. So they were there, but they weren't like announced really as part of it. And then also at one point, oh yeah, see there they are. So perhaps in some way it's like similar to trying to put like an abstract thing next to a representational thing, and like putting choreography next to everyday movement, like thinking about spaces of waiting and like how we pass time and like these incredible little virtual worlds that we like enter into in our phones. And then there was one other part of the score, which I'll show you quickly, and then we can let this play while we talk, but once a day this person would rush in with like all these bags, very annoying and loud, and would just sit and like lean them all up against the sculpture. So that's part of it, but wouldn't be announced that it's part of it. I think that's all I want to say about this. I'm working now on a big project about waiting, which I don't know what form it's taking exactly, but I think it has, this project moved it forward somewhat, like thinking about the exhibition as a place to wait, and these creating seating that people can like do different things on, and like being an audience member sitting right next to the choreography that's happening suddenly. And the choreography itself is very enclosed and antisocial, like there's no eye contact, you're totally folded over the whole time. So everybody's in their like own self-enclosed